being a bad parent wouldn't be as terrifying a concept to me if I hadn't been abused by my mom. I really know how bad I could hurt someone. Hello and welcome to How to Be a Terrible Daughter, the podcast where Megan and I hate your parents for you
They deserve it.
because they deserve it. Come on, man. Like, let's not pretend and be nice, okay? So, we're going to make jokes about our childhoods because they sucked. And we're going to talk about how we survived them. And we're going to share tools and skills that we've learned along the way.
Yes.
So,
Dark humor being one of them. I actually had an experience earlier this week where I made a really, really dark joke and some essentially was like, "That's not funny. Are you sure you should be laughing at that?" And I was like, "Yes. Yes, I am sure that I should be laughing at this." It's a way of softening the blow of something too horrific to process without humor. So that's always such an interesting litmus test for me that, the dark jokes and how they land with people.
well, and in my theoretical orientation, they actually talk about how crying and laughing are not that dissimilar. It's a physical release and it
Mm.
reorganizes the nervous system. Yeah. So it's not like crying is better, you
Yeah,
know?
interesting.
So,
Anyway,
yeah.
who are we? Now that we've already been like rambling for 2 minutes.
Well,
I'm
you're Megan.
I'm Megan. I knew that part. I knew it. I'm Megan. I'm an occupational therapist and an energy healer and a medical intuitive.
And I'm Elizabeth. I am a multimedia artist and a psychotherapist.
We're
We're
cousins.
cousins. Woo!
We're cousins who both happen to luck out into the lottery of a narcissistic mother. Yay.
Three cherries, four diamonds. Whew. Joker, Joker, Joker.
Yes. So we're going to talk about a topic today that I am woefully unprepared to talk about, but I am going to tag along as a happy sidekick and maybe add something useful. I don't know. We're going to talk about parenting. I do not have children. I have a furry child. I work with children as a pediatric OT, but I do not have any of my own. But Elizabeth, you do. You took that brave leap of procreating.
Although I will say what they told us in therapy school, which is that, everyone has been a child. So even if you haven't technically been a parent, and I would say, so much more than our own parents knew about being a parent. So
Yeah,
you've got
it's
your own
probably true, but that's
experience.
a pretty low bar.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But you do work with
I
kids.
do work with
That's,
kids. Yes. And I
so
interact with parents. I've spoken to parents. I know people who are parents.
I'm so sorry. Yeah. So it's going to be a light topic today. No triggers.
Right. There's nothing triggering for anyone about having children, even people who grew up in healthy families, not triggering at all.
No, 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 no. I think before we really get into the meat of it, I think that both Megan and I wanted to say, just to make it clear that parenting is optional. It's optional.
Yes. Yeah. I think that that's something that's gaining a little more acceptance in the last probably 10 years or so, the whole sort of childless by choice scenario. It's interesting for me because I think I've shared on this podcast before, but that I got cancer at a young age, at 30, and as part of the treatment, I ended up not being able to have kids. And I've seen such a huge shift, even in the last 15 years, of how people react to me about that. Like, at first, it was like, again, people didn't know, right? They would just say, "Do you have kids? Are you planning to have kids with your partner?" And no, the reaction I would get would be like, "Oh, well, you may change your mind as you get older," or, "Are you sure?" Whatever, right? And now people are like, "Yeah, good for you. No kids. Life must
Yeah,
be great."
now
I'm
that the
like,
gap between the haves and the have-nots has grown exponentially larger, I think people relate to it a little bit more.
yeah. Yeah, that's probably true. But I think that there's like, there's sort of a like trope now of like, the single rich auntie. Not that I'm an aunt or rich, but I'm single.
You're an auntie. I mean, I technically you're my kid's cousin, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But
You're not. You're
but I
mame
think
for
that
us.
there is a role for women now of being that single person who just it's not a dink because there's no people. A sink, single income again, that is acceptable now that it wasn't in a way before. So, and especially, yes, especially if you grew up in a family like mine, and I'm sure you did too. I gave a lot of thought to like, would I be able, have I done enough therapy and have I worked through my stuff enough
Yeah,
that if I had kids, I could feel like I wasn't passing on the shit?
yeah,
If the answer to that is no, I don't know, and I don't feel comfortable with it, it's totally fine to not have kids. And for many other reasons, but in
yeah,
particular with what we're talking about.
yeah, absolutely. And that's partly because whether we recognize it or not, we've already been parents.
Yeah.
You know, we did not get childhoods,
Nope.
even though it may have looked like that on the outside, right? We may have gotten all of the toys that a perfect childhood would have telegraphed. We weren't. We
All the
paid for
toys that our
everything.
mothers thought that we wanted.
All the toys that they wanted and they didn't get.
All the toys that they never got that they
Yeah.
assumed that we wanted.
Yeah. Because there was no difference between us and them. I'm sorry. Did I use my outside voice there? Did I ever talk to you about my dollhouse? Maybe that's the story I should tell.
Yes, I think
Oh,
you told that on one of the mini mom
okay.
offs.
Maybe I
Yeah.
should. Okay.
Uh, Terrifying. You should make a horror movie about that. You should write a
I
screenplay.
should.
Make a short film.
I have a Conjuring franchise level childhood that I could just do movies and
Hmm.
movies and movies.
You absolutely do.
Not that you don't, but that's not something I should really speak to. But yeah, but yeah. So I think there's a couple of things that helped me, even though I did end up having a kid. I only had a kid, I think it wasn't until I was 40 that I actually had that moment of like, oh, wait a minute, like, you know, time's moving along. But I didn't want to have kids until I knew I wanted one. I didn't feel wanted, which is ironic because I was adopted, but that's actually, I think the truth of it was that I think my mom wanted a child, but not me. I
Right.
think that she wanted, and I don't even think she wanted a real person. I think she
I was
wanted
going to
a
say, I don't
doll.
even know if she really wanted a child. She
No.
wanted a mirror to reflect back on her some things that she wanted reflected back.
Yes. And the longer I live, the more I actually suspect that when narcissists say that they want something or pressure people into giving them things, I don't think they actually want them. I think it probably comes from some public conversation where someone asks them, do you have kids or whatever? And that
Mhm.
there's this sort of slight social shame
Yeah.
that they feel. And so, because I can see like when my mom had one kid, especially at the time, it was just like, oh, you're just going to have the one? Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah.
we have two or we have three or whatever. And
Yeah.
I could totally see a narcissist just being like, I don't ever want to feel this way again. So I need to have a second kid, you
Yeah.
know?
I mean, I think the MO of narcissism as a disease is just avoiding shame at all costs.
Yeah.
And the triggers for what can make a narcissist feel shame are everything.
Yes.
So it's just this constant, not doing anything you can not to experience shame and then everything making you feel ashamed, right? It's a never-ending barrage. So,
Yeah.
all right. So you decided to have a child who's lovely, by the way. One of my favorite people on the planet is your kid.
I love
Uh,
my kid. My kid's amazing.
your kid's amazing. But you were talking about, when we were planning this episode, you were talking about a whole bunch of stuff that I hadn't really thought through, but that made so much sense in terms of like the triggers and what it's like
Yeah.
parenting without parents. So yeah, I'd love to hear like a little bit
Yeah.
more.
Well, what really started it for me that I would go to the nursery school that my kid was going to. And I would have these really intense feelings. Like there were a couple moments where I was there and like I got teary. Like I just felt so
Mm.
terrible. And like I had no context for any of them. And I really got to the point where I realized, okay, this is actually a flashback. This is like a PTSD flashback, which is what, 3, 4 years old. And the thing is because I had kids late, right? I had a whole life for myself where there weren't children. I mean, I interacted with kids professionally, but that didn't trigger me at all. But I thought I was okay. I thought I
Mm.
was more healed and more settled and whatever. And then when I had a kid, I mean, over and over and over again, I would be triggered because as my kid grew up, I would be in situations where I had been before, only in the past I'd been the kid, and now I'm the grown up. And so
Mm.
I would just be flooded with these feelings. It's just so complicated. So it's like I would be flooded with these sense memories and these feelings in the moment, right? And of course, here I am, I'm having to be the grown up. So it's like, I mean, one of the things that they talk about parenting is that you have to do it on the fly, right? You have to make these, snap decisions and whatever. I'm in the position of the parent, which automatically, viscerally puts me in the position of being the abuser, which
Mm.
was incredibly painful and terrifying, right? And then also on top of that, aside from what I'd learned in school and what my inner child was screaming at me not to do, I
Yeah.
had zero guidance for how to be a good parent, and I had no one to go to. And I didn't even realize it until this year. It wasn't even that I didn't have a mom to go to, because that was true, but I also didn't have my mom's friends I could go to. I didn't
Yeah.
have aunts or whatever because my mom burnt every bridge. So, sometimes when you have like a not great parent, you still have the village, right? But my mom, and I think that
Your
can be
mom burned the
true.
village.
Yeah, she burned the village down and salted the earth, and then was just like, I don't know why you're so neurotic. I just okay, all right, bitch. And so, yeah, so it's like, I hadn't really realized how much I needed a mom until I became a mom. And then that's also having to navigate my own mom's bullshit. I mean, like, I very clearly did not. We basically told my mom the wrong time that I was getting my planned C-section. And I think the only thing that
Good.
saved me from, oh God, because I was nervous. I mean, come on, it's a C-section. And historically, I mean, it's been really recent that those have turned out well in the history of giving birth. So, and I just knew that if my mom was there, it was like sometimes it's like only like one little iota of anxiety or something that can turn things in a very different direction. And I think the only thing that kept me from really getting it from her afterwards was that I was recovering from surgery. So, and we were never alone together. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, she was
That's always
pretty
key.
upset.
Don't be alone with them when you're recovering from something or sick or whatever.
Yeah.
So you are in this position where you're having to be the parent, but you're simultaneously, your brain is dragging you back to when you were the age of the child, which I'm sure every parent's brain does in those
Yeah.
moments, but most of the time it's pleasant memories, right? Most of the time you're drawn back to like, what would my mom have done in this situation? And it's something loving and functional. You're drawn back to this horrible memory that's triggering. So you're
Right.
trying to basically manage a PTSD reaction at the same time you're trying to parent.
Yes.
And you obviously can't go to your mom and say, what would you have done in this situation?
Right. Right. Exactly. Well, I would have told you that you're being ridiculous, and then I would have grounded you, and I would have made you feel terrible. Like, thanks. Actually, to be perfectly fair, I didn't do those things in the moment, but I would actually ask my mom advice as a preemptive way of making her to feel fine. But I never intended on taking any of her advice. It was
Yeah.
just a way to get her to talk about herself and for her to feel special and important and like she was helping me.
You were gentle
So
parenting her.
I was, in fact, gentle parenting her.
Yeah.
If only it had worked.
No.
I don't think she was ever gentler because of my gentle parenting. So,
No. Well, here's the thing, actually, it's not gentle parenting. I think when you're looking at, I mean, us Gen Xers talk all the time, and the millennials, we talk all the time about gentle parenting our parents, right? The boomer generation, sorry, boomers, not all boomers. But I think with narcissists, it's slightly different than gentle parenting. It's like survival manipulation.
it's appeasement is what it is.
Yeah, it's appeasement. But
Yeah.
you can get to a point where you're doing it consciously. You're like, I'm going to appease in this way
Yeah.
so that the volcano doesn't blow up later,
Hmm.
you
Yeah,
know?
I did a lot of that.
Yeah. And I think when we're little, that starts out unconscious. But as we go through therapy and start to recognize our own self-abandonment, you can actually use it as a way to, parent the narcissist, keep them from having a tantrum.
Which is a way of parenting yourself if that's the best choice for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
But still.
Yeah. So, I mean, essentially what I'm hearing is that if you have your own kids and you have a parent who's a narcissist, like do whatever you can to keep them from actually being involved with the kids' life.
That too. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I was really lucky in that, and I always put myself forward as the scapegoat to protect my kid. So I never saw my mom hurt my kid, and my kid says that my mom never hurt them, which I feel really great about. But yeah, like I think maybe they did babysitting once or twice, a handful of times, and certainly not in the first 2 years of
Yeah.
life. So yeah, definitely. And I was like a hawk. Like, they'd come back and I'd be like, so how was it? Like, can
Yeah.
I like not be creepy and like super, mental health assessment, but like I was
Yeah.
really watching and paying attention. And there were definitely times where more than once where not even just leaving my kid there, we would go to visit, and within 20 minutes, I'd be like, we're leaving. Like, you guys are having an argument, or you guys were having an argument, and this feels really, really bad. And
Mhm.
so we're out. Like, I would just
Yeah.
leave.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So,
mean, it's interesting how it's in some ways easier to do that for someone else than it is to do that for ourselves. Like, we don't tend to leave after 20 minutes. If we show up at Christmas dinner and it's terrible, we don't tend to walk out after 20 minutes, but we will do that
yep.
if it's our kid, right? Which is
Yeah.
interesting to sort of think about in terms of the healing from self-abandonment process.
Yeah.
What did you do when you were sort of, I'm sure there's this I mean, I know for me, when I thought about having kids, there's this underlying fear that I would unconsciously do the things that my mother did, right? Because I never, either they were lurking there in my unconscious or that like I never learned another way to do things or, whatever. How did you deal with the fear that you were going to pass this on?
I did do a lot of therapy. I did a lot of therapy. I had also, fortunately, I had to learn a parenting curriculum when I was getting my hours. I actually taught parenting classes for parents of teenagers, which sounds ridiculous now, but it was a 10-week research-based curriculum. So, I had that kind of structure there. And also, to be perfectly honest, the best parenting I ever got was from therapists. And so that was really helpful. I also had to get a lot of encouragement from, husband of the pod, and I really trust his opinion. I think practically in the moment, and I think this is something you and I talked about when we were talking about this episode, is to really put myself aside and really put myself in the position of my kid. Just being like, okay, what are they telling me? What am I noticing? And can I literally put myself in that position? And then it was much easier at that point. And then also, and now that I think about it, the meditation practice that I have is really based on a foundation of love.
Hmm.
And I knew that if I could tap into love in any given moment, that anything that really came out of that place I could trust more than anything else.
Yeah. And then you also talked about when we were talking about this episode that this was something that was sort of like happened over and over again because as your kid grew up and you would start to have more memories of from when they were that age and then the next age and then the next age. And it was sort of like this process where you had to, I'm guessing, sort of refine what would happen when these triggers came up or when you were questioning your parenting skills.
Tell me a little bit more about that question.
You just mentioned that like as they grew up, it uncovered more memories.
Hmm. I think in some ways it got harder, partly because when I was really in the early stages, I wasn't in therapy. So there was this buildup of stuff that didn't get completely processed. I think that if I had, especially EMDR, it was kind of like going through the EMDR without the resolution. Although it reminds me of something else, which is that in any given situation, a lot of the times, you know, I would be in a situation with my kid and they would be showing me something, and I would have like 10 or 15 different things that I would want to teach them about this situation, messages, but knowing that I could only give one at a time. I could only give one message at a time.
Hmm.
And at first it was really difficult. But then as it kept happening over and over again, I could give a different message every time based on what it seemed like the most important thing in the moment was.
Hmm.
And always the most important thing is, I love you no matter what, and I see you,
Yeah.
right? And I'm with you.
Yeah.
That's always the most important thing. It doesn't matter any other stuff. If it feels like that's going off the rails, you have to immediately go back to that message.
Yeah.
I love you right now. I'm here.
Yeah.
There isn't anything you could do, nothing you could do that
Yeah.
would change that.
Yeah.
But
This is a little bit off topic, but related. I just saw this video on social media of this guy it was a point of view of a pilot and a passenger in a helicopter that lost its engine, right?
oof,
So they're in the middle of the mountains, the helicopter loses its engine, and the pilot did this amazing thing. I mean, I'm sure the passenger's freaking out, right? Is he started talking through what he was doing to the passenger. And one of the things immediately that he said, first he called for Mayday. And then pretty much the first thing he said after that was, you're going to be okay because you're with me.
yeah.
And I just thought that's what everyone needs to hear when they're scared from their parent. I mean, this obviously wasn't a parent situation. This was a helicopter pilot, but childhood is scary. Childhood is uncertain, right? And that kind of echoes what you just said. Like everyone just needs to hear, like, you're going to be okay because you're with me and I love you, you know?
One of my favorite victory laps was this was a couple years ago. My kid said something like, "Oh, there's like something I need to tell you that I kept from you, whatever." And I said to them, "Oh, did you not want to tell me because you were worried about, how I would respond? Like, did you think I'd get upset or whatever?" And they were like, "No. Why would I ever feel like that? You're my mom. Of course I can tell you anything." And I'm just like, and the crowd goes wild.
That's funny. That's so good.
The outrage, right? What are you talking about?
I have felt like this with my pets that there's this moments of like almost being incredulous that when they're upset or hurt, they want to come to you. You're like, why? Why would you come to
Right?
me? Right? Like when my
So,
dog
like,
gets like a thorn stuck in her paw, like a little sticky or something, and she'll come limping over to me and like, put her paw in my face. And I'm like, how did you know to come to me? Like,
because every single time I've come to you, you've actually been there for me and given me what I've needed.
but it still baffles me, Like
Yeah.
I'm just like, why would you come to me when you weren't feeling well? That or if you're scared, like what?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because you're not barbed wire
I
or terry
know.
cloth.
I
You're an
know.
actual mammal.
I know. Apparently in the past I'd shown them love and care. I don't know what that's about.
It's really weird.
All right, so before we move on to talking about some particular tools, I mean, we've sort of alluded to some stuff as we've been talking. Is there anything else you want to cover just in terms of like how parenting is different when you have a narcissistic parent.
Yeah, I think just the stuff about never being good enough and the perfectionism, and coupled with this real experience of how high stakes it feels, because I know that being a bad parent wouldn't be as terrifying a concept to me if I hadn't been abused by my mom. I really know how bad I could hurt someone. And then that coupled with the I'm not good enough, and, I can think of 15 ways about how I screwed up this sentence that I'm actually saying right now. It's a really deadly combination. And it was actually really great because at some point my therapist said to me, you know, is there any way that you could possibly be a good mom? And I just said no. And that's when it hit me. According to the narcissist's playbook, right, that has been given to me, bequeathed to me, there is no way. I can't
Yeah.
possibly be a good mom because there is actually no way of achieving it. I still sometimes get taken over by that. But that's really what it is. You know, in my best moments, I realize that it's not my job to be a good mom. It's my job to be the mom that is me, that's
Mm,
really actually me
yeah.
authentically, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Mm.
but that's terrifying.
Yeah. No, that makes sense though. I think that that's true. I'm seeing how that can be true in so many other areas of life. If you're the child of a narcissist, like you're never good enough at your job, you're never a good enough partner, you're never good enough this, you're never good enough that, your house is never clean enough or whatever the thing is that day. But I
Yep.
can only imagine that as a mom, that would be amplified because it really is this, yeah, I mean, it's like an echo, right, of all of the things that you'd been taught,
Yeah.
you know?
Yep. But they do say that parenting really is a way of looking at your shadow. But it's important to do that. Like,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is what they didn't do. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's why we're here,
That's
because
why
they
we're
refuse to do
why
that
we
work.
started a podcast about them.
Yep.
All right, so let's talk about some tools or tips or other things that you've gleaned over the years that could help people who are in this position of now you had a narcissistic parent, especially a mom, and now you're trying to figure out how to parent your own child. So you mentioned listening, which I think is important, like not rushing to judgment about what they're saying or what you think they're saying.
Yeah. And I think for me, that's embodying, but I don't think everybody can do that. But it's really so many of the times when my kid is misbehaving and I kind of ask them what's up, right? And they tell me how they're experiencing. If I just give myself a minute, a memory will come up of being that age and feeling exactly that way. And just in terms of like sensory stuff or whatever. And then being like, oh, when I was that age, there was just no one to take that stuff to. So I just shut down, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that yeah, I really fundamentally trust my kid. And I also have memories of having physical experiences in my body that there's no way that anybody could understand. And so it's like, okay, I'm not in my kid's body. So why don't I just assume that they're telling me the truth? So many times, especially in the first couple of years, they'd melt down about something or whatever, and I would not understand at all because I would be like, you're capable of more mature behavior than this. And then, like, sometimes 2 or 3 hours later, I would be like, oh, right. You didn't sleep well last night. That is the missing thing. It was like there was always something missing that I had forgotten to take into account that would explain their behavior. And so punishment was just not reasonable. It just wasn't
Yeah.
reasonable because they just weren't capable of that in the moment. And that I should be able to trust that there's something that I don't know. So,
That leads really nicely into something I wanted to mention that I have studied and recommended to a lot of the parents that I work with, and it's been really helpful, and that I use in my practice too, which is Ross Greene's work. He wrote a couple books. One's called The Explosive Child, and the other one is called Lost at School. But his framework is what's called collaborative and proactive solutions. And you actually work with the child to come up with solutions to the problem, right? So you're not like, I am the parent from up on high and this is what should be
Mhm.
happening right now. You shouldn't be screaming right now. This is, I need that from, my higher place here. And the first part of this process is exactly what you said. He said that every behavior is communicating either an unmet need, right? So sleep, could be an unmet need, not getting enough sleep, or a
Yeah.
lagging skill, meaning something that the child doesn't feel confident doing that you're expecting that they should know how to do or can do. And that really all behavior stems from one of those two things. It's not just for
Yeah.
kids. I actually think this is true for adults too. Like a lot of
Yeah.
times when I get depressed or anxious or angry or whatever these days, I stop and I'm like, okay, what are the unmet need or the lagging skills here, right? And a lot of time it's like, I'm too busy. I need more rest time, or I don't
Yeah.
want to go do this thing. My need is to stay away from this situation because it makes me feel uncomfortable, but I got to go do it for whatever reason, right? And even just acknowledging those things can be really helpful.
Yeah.
And then from there, you actually go talk to the kid about this and you say, and it's always, it's never that a kid can't do something or won't do something. It's that they're having a hard time doing something, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
you go to the kid and you say, I see that when we're going from school to karate class, you're having a hard time. Can you tell me more about that? And you ask the kid and you listen to what they're actually saying, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's takes a little longer conversation. Sometimes you'll get like an I don't know or. But this idea that it's about considering their position and realizing that, yeah, someone who's young may not have the skill set that you have or may not look at the world the way that you're looking at it. And I think that this is really helpful for those of us who grew up in these kinds of families because there was not a single unmet need or lagging skill that I didn't have to take care of on my own.
Yep.
And so, this framework that it's the adult's responsibility to identify those and to come from a place of calmness with empathy and say, I notice this is really hard for you. Can you tell me more about this?
Yeah.
Is just so foreign to me. Like, I see it a lot too again, we can talk at larger length about how things like white supremacy and the nuclear family are actually narcissistic structures. But what it creates is this idea of parenting that is very like a power dynamic, right? Where there's a hierarchy, right? Hierarchy is absolutely part of our society and it's part of narcissism too, right? So realizing that this child has a very different, but just as important and equal sense of awareness and wisdom about what's going on,
Yes.
I think is really, really important. And they may not be able to communicate it in a sophisticated way, and they may not be able to, but given enough time, everyone can become aware of when something doesn't feel good or feel right. But we were never given that opportunity. Like we just had to railroad over our own discomfort on a daily basis. And so I
Yeah.
think it can be helpful when you're parenting for you too to stop and think about this, What is my unmet need in this situation? It's changed how I communicate with kids. So, I work with special education kids, so I get hit and kicked a lot, right? Hair pulled, stuff like that, screamed at my ear, all that stuff, right? And I've stopped being like, stop screaming. And I've started saying, it's really hard for me to stay here when it's really loud. Like, you know what I mean? Like I start thinking of like what's my unmet need here?
Yeah.
Is there a way that we can communicate about this that's not so loud? Because this is really hard for me.
Yeah.
Because I think that the key that we're missing and I'm going on a much larger soapbox, but the key that we're missing a lot in society is empathy, you know?
Yeah.
So having empathy for your kids, realizing there's a reason they're doing this, having empathy for yourself, that this is hard. And in that moment, having this collaborative and proactive solution where everyone gets their needs met and everyone gets to experience empathy. I think
Mm.
you can parent that way. It's just not the way we were taught, especially coming from families like ours.
Oh, yeah, I know. I really resonate with what you're talking about in terms of empathy, and I wonder if sort of one of the hidden things about empathy when it's really true is that it is non-hierarchical in nature.
Yeah.
And I think about that I really learned in my tradition of the craft, right? That each person, regardless of station or whatever, is worthy, right? And is sovereign in themselves, right? And that they have their own powers and their own strengths, and that no one is worth more than anybody else. And authority is about responsibility, it's
Mhm.
not about worth. And so, while I understand as a parent that I am in a position of responsibility, I really come from it looking at my child as a separate, worthwhile human being, that we are an equal footing, right, in terms of our souls,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, why would I not trust them the way that I trust myself?
Yeah.
Or why would I treat them with less respect than I treat myself?
Yeah.
Right. And that's a tough one. That's really hard to find places in this world where that is modeled, I think.
Yeah. Agreed. And all of that being said, nobody's perfect.
No.
Everyone's going to lose their cool sometimes. And what I hear from the clients I work with all the time is like, I feel so bad. I yelled at my kid, blah, blah, blah. Or I was just at the end of my rope and I couldn't deal with it and I walked out of the room or, whatever. And the thing that I always remind them is, one thing I said, did you apologize? Did you go back and explain? Well, yes, of course I did, right? So
Yeah.
did you ever get that? No. Did your parent ever apologize to you in a way that was sincere? No. I said, well, what you're teaching them is something that you never learned, which is that two people can get mad at each other, and that after that, there can be repair.
Yeah.
You know, that
Yeah.
frustrations are going to happen, anger is going to happen, disagreements are going to happen. You don't have to behave all the time in a way that makes the other person happy. You can be a little turd sometimes and piss off your parent, but there's
Yeah.
repair afterwards. You come back together, you talk about it. You
Yeah.
talk about what happened, right? And I
Yeah.
can't even express how important of like a vital emotional nutrient that is for kids to learn that
Yeah.
there's repair, because I mean, it's sort of like that's the antidote to raising a people pleaser, right? Is raising someone that knows that they can piss someone else off and it's going to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I know it took me a really long time to learn how to apologize and to be accountable without shaming myself and punishing myself, because that's also really uncomfortable for people. So it's like, okay, yeah. And I've said to, and of course, it's at the right time and place. I've said to my kid, like, okay, I know that, you're telling me that I have this thing that I do, and you're right, I do. And I'm going to work on it. I promise to work on it. But can I ask you a favor? Will you call me on this? And sometimes I'll give like, not in public necessarily, but like,
Yeah.
but please call me on this,
Yeah.
because I don't want to do this to you. Like we had this conversation a bunch of years ago about perfectionism. And it's like, I realized that I'm sure, actually, now that I think about it, I do know where my mom got her perfectionism, and she got it from her mom. But
Hmm.
it's like, I didn't know that. Like when she was, forcing me to whatever, I didn't have any context. It was like this was coming from her. And I do remember when my kid was little, I was like, oh, yeah, they're not going to have any idea about where it came from to me. It's
Right.
just going to come from me to them, I need to stop this shit.
Yeah.
You know, I
Yeah.
need to stop it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. Are we ready for our mini crazy mom off where we try to battle each other out like battle royale, but with crazy mom stories?
Sure. Sure, sure, sure. I don't have one that's coming up to mind yet. So if you could go,
You want me to go first? All right.
yes, because it's an embarrassment of riches over here.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, where do we start if we're going with the theme of the week? Where do we start with our mothers being bad parents? Okay, so mine isn't a particular story, but it's a phrase she used to use that was so gaslighty and terrible. So when I was growing up, there was this book. I don't remember the name of it or who wrote it, but essentially there was a psychological concept called being the good enough parent. And the premise behind the good enough parent is that you could make mistakes, right? That it wasn't about being perfect. You could make mistakes, but that if you fundamentally, loved and cared for your kid, like they were going to be okay, right? So the message of the book is like, don't beat yourself up for every little mistake you make. As long as you're doing a good job, like 80% of the time or something, your kid's going to be okay, right? So sort of don't sweat
Uh-huh.
the small stuff.
Uh-huh.
But the problem is that my mom would do something horrifying to me and I would call her on it. I remember, I mean, I didn't start doing this until I was probably a teenager, right? So,
Yeah.
she would shame me in front of her friends, say something incredibly embarrassing and inappropriate in
Hmm.
front of her friends about me. And then when we got in the car on the way home, when I would say to her, like, that was not cool, like, that was really embarrassing. And I did not give you permission to share that in front of to your friends. That was personal. She would go, well, I am a good enough mother. And at some point, I remember being like, no, you're not. Like, you're not. Like, that was not something that's excusable. Like, like I told you that in confidence and you just
Mhm.
mocked me about it in front of all of your friends, right? Like, and she'd be like, well, you don't understand. You're not a parent. Like, parents all make mistakes. Like, she sort of hid behind this good enough mother thing. But I had to hear that all when I was growing up. I'm a good enough mother. I'm a good enough mother. And I was just like, I mean, I don't know how to argue with that, right? Because
Because
whatever.
there is no argument, right?
Right.
It's just this, it's like she's flinging poop at you. Yeah.
So yeah, anytime I would confront her on something she did that was particularly terrible, I would always get, well, I'm a good enough mother. You can't nitpick me on everything.
Wow.
So, and what I should have said to her is what you just said. There is an embarrassment of riches of stuff that I could bring up right now that show how you are not, in fact, a good enough mother. You are not even an adequate mother.
Like receipts, please.
Yeah, exactly.
Can we roll the tape back?
I think at some points in this argument, because again, she would throw that line at me all the time. I do remember a couple occasions where I was like, give me some examples,
Yeah.
which of
Yeah.
course, just made her even more angry.
Of
Uh,
course. Of
right.
course.
Because there were, not examples.
My mom did the same thing, but she did it by like making your mom look bad and like all of these other moms look bad, you know?
What do you mean?
And well, just like, I, well, some of it was like actual lies or willful manipulation. You know, she would ascribe her feelings to someone else or whatever. Like I remember one time she told the story a bunch of times about she was talking to my aunt, and apparently she was talking about how quote unquote difficult things were, you know, with me. And my aunt said to my mom, well, you know, do you regret adopting her? And my mom was just like, what could possibly make you say that? And and it's just like she thought I shouldn't have adopted you or whatever. And it's just like, no, 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 no,
Oh
no,
my
no, no,
God.
no, 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 no. She heard something in what you were saying.
Yeah.
She actually heard you.
Yeah.
And then she spoke aloud what you absolutely will not allow to be spoken, and now she's the bad guy.
And now she's the bad guy. Right.
Now she's the bad guy.
Yeah. No, no, actually, she was just calling you on what you actually said, and now you're furious about it.
Yes. And actually, I just saw something which absolutely described this to a T, which is that the minute that someone makes a narcissist accountable for something, they will absolutely drop you. And it doesn't matter, and it could be your kids. And that's exactly what happened the last time I talked to her.
Yeah.
I said to her, I said, you owe me an apology. You're shitting on Megan, my cousin, who has treated me better than you have ever, in my life. And you're trying to ruin my vacation. You owe me an apology for that.
Yeah.
Well, your father and I have an entire list of things that we have that you need to apologize to us for. And when you get back, we need to have a conversation and we need to go through that list.
That's such Darvoing. That's
I
Darvoing, but with
know.
a list of Darvo topics.
And I can't help but say this again because this is my little mini EMDR session. She said, what did she say? She said, you are a never-ending stream of wants and needs, and I just fulfill them without question.
Tell me you're talking about yourself without telling me you're talking about yourself.
Totally. And when I think about the words that she used, it's so interesting
I mean,
because,
that describes her to a T, like to a T.
yeah. And it's also, I think the thing is, the picture that I get is this yawning cosmic emptiness that actually isn't in the words.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's like that's what she's referencing. Absolutely.
It's interesting because you say that the yawning cosmic emptiness, because when I picture my mom's experience of the world, and when I have pictured it, I mean, she's gone now, but the image that
Thank
would come to
goodness.
mind, yeah, I know. The image that would come to mind is like either a bottomless hole or a black hole, but something that there's
Absolutely.
no, that you just can't possibly fill because it's infinity, right?
Yep. Yep.
Oh my goodness. I'm curious now. Did your mom ever make commentary about my mom and how she was raising me or our difficulties?
Yeah.
Because I know I remember hearing about what a difficult child you were, but also hearing like criticisms of your mom's parenting at the same time.
Oh, okay. I think it was tough because I think for a good amount of time, they were in alliance. And then I think when your parents got divorced for several decades, she was the victim. Your mom was the victim. And so my
Yeah.
mom could feel superior by aligning with
Uh,
her, right?
oh,
So,
yeah, that's what
so
she got out of it. Yeah.
yeah, because so it's this never ending, victim, persecutor, rescuer thing, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
so if your dad was the persecutor, right, and your mom was the victim, my mom could be the rescuer, right?
Yes.
And then she would never be the victim and she wouldn't be the persecutor, right? So,
Right.
but I do think that she did that a lot in general, which is you know, like the one thing that I'm thinking about is actually more related to her mother, but she did this with everybody, including your mom, which is like, well, let's go and get your prom dress handmade. Because when I was a teenager, my mother wouldn't even buy me a single dress to go to a dance, and I had to borrow all of the dresses whenever I was invited to a dance.
Yeah.
And so it was like, or she would talk about how she did this a couple of times, and I'm sure she did it with, I was talking to Megan's mom and she was complaining about Megan, and I gave her this advice,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
I don't know if she's going to take. She told me that I'm too lenient or I'm too soft or I'm too liberal or whatever. It's just like, okay, all right. You're just more invested in looking good,
Right.
right? Than
Yeah.
Megan's mom is.
Yeah.
So she did a lot of that.
Yeah.
She did a lot of that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking, going back to like the topic of this episode, like all of those things, like not only was it our mother's influence on how we thought of parenting, but it was also their constant critique of everyone else and how they did it. Do you know what I mean? Like
Oh,
that also had to
yeah.
have an impact,
Yeah, absolutely.
when you're trying to figure out how to parent someone, and not having good role models.
Yeah. And just the overarching theme of the goalposts constantly shifting and the story constantly shifting. I don't know what your experience is, but I could always find a way to paint myself in a negative light. Always.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. I could find a way to make my greatest achievement into something that is something I should feel ashamed of.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Either something I should feel ashamed of or something that there's no reason for me to be proud of it because like anyone could have done that. Like
Yeah.
basically taking away its value.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
God
Are
damn
you
them.
calling me out from
So
our
glad they're
conversation
dead.
earlier today?
Oh, Jesus. I'm so glad we don't have to deal with them anymore. I'm so glad we survived.
Me too.
Look
And
at
I mean,
us.
I know.
Free, finally.
I know. And we're doing this together. This is healing for us. And this is just speaking the truth, right?
Yeah.
And we're talking about this, because they didn't talk about this. They hid their pain and their shame and whatever. And then they just barfed it up on everybody else,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? So,
Goodness. All right, tools. What is a tool or something you used this week to help you get through?
movies. I've been watching movies that I've wanted to watch for a really long time. And then just this morning, I started rewatching Velvet Goldmine, which is, I don't know,
Ooh.
it is like this. If Lost Boys has a soup song, Velvet Goldmine has everything. It's got the music, it's got the queerness, it's got the costumes, it's got the mixing of genres, it's got history. It's so good and it's so absurd. It's just, and it's like sexy and mythological and it's got Oscar Wilde in it and like just so good. So good.
Todd Haynes, right? Is it a Todd Haynes movie?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Todd
Love
Haynes,
Todd
glam
Haynes.
rock.
Yes. Yeah,
So good.
that's really good.
Designed specifically to delight me.
That's a good one. Movies are good. I've been watching movies too. This is going to sound silly to people that don't get this concept, but I am very excited because I bought myself a couple hydroponic gardening things like Arrow Garden, but not that brand. And I'm growing my own tomatoes and lettuce and stuff. And for some reason, for some reason, I know exactly why. I have a hard time feeling proud of myself for any kind of accomplishment whatsoever. And I have been so good at talking myself through the fact that I am just starting this new thing. And so not every plant is going to sprout. Not every plant is going to make it, and that's okay. It doesn't mean anything about me or that I've done this badly or that I should have known better or whatever. Like, this is the first time I'm attempting something new. And so, of course, it's not going to be 100% successful. I've felt really good about how kind I've been to myself about this and how much I've been battling the perfectionist voices. And I almost feel like, I have to start with something as small as growing plants because the
Yes.
bigger things feel too big to be proud of myself about. Like, so it's like, I think my tool this week is like when you're working on these big shifts in how you see yourself. Start small. So don't start with, I'm going to see myself as a great mother. That's huge. Start with, this is a new thing I'm doing, and look, 50% of the plants are making it. I think that being gentle with yourself and starting small is really important. Plus, I'm excited to have tomatoes in the winter that don't
Yeah.
taste like supermarket tomatoes in the winter because those taste like cardboard.
Yeah. And there's such an intimacy, right? When you nurtured a plant and then like this fruit or whatever comes out and it's like it feels like it's a gift from someone that you know, right? And it's
Yeah.
like, it's so, yeah, I think we're really missing that. I think
Yeah.
we're missing that. Yeah. And you are amazing. Just let me know when you feel like you need a particular good feedback or whatever, because I have like a whole laundry list of things that I appreciate and respect you for.
Oh, thank you.
So it's true.
Same to you. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
trying not to just immediately go cancel, cancel. I didn't hear that.
For the marketing class I took when I was building my business, one of the assignments was to go ask friends and family, like, what are the 3 words you would use to describe me? And I thought it was really interesting because everyone was having such a hard time doing this, like feeling insecure about asking people, or, like that felt weird. And for some reason, I remember being so excited about it because it's that thing of like, you don't know. Other people, I think, can see what people appreciate and admire about them. But you and I and people like us have such a huge wall of shame that it's really hard. And people have to be really explicit before we get it. And
Yeah.
people have to like literally like write a list and hand it to us.
I need evidence-based data.
I need evidence-based data that I'm worthy of love. Like I'm not willing to just accept this on faith alone.
Yeah.
So yeah, anyway.
I need to know how you arrived at your conclusion so I can do my own calculations
And then
and
I'm going to
see.
debunk everything you have here, and I'm going to need you to defend it thesis style.
Yes,
There will be a
exactly.
panel. But at the
Yes.
end, you will get a doctorate in loving me. So that's. All right. Well, thank you for listening, everybody. And we hope that this was helpful in some way. If you have any questions or comments or just want to email us and give us detailed breakdowns of why you love us, you can do that. We are at h2bterrible@gmail.com. That's the letter H, the number 2, the letter B, terrible@gmail.com. You can find us on Instagram at terribledaughterpod, and you can message us there or follow us there for sick memes. And yeah, we just want to remind you that, especially when it comes to taking parenting advice from your narcissistic parent, just be the villain. Just accept that they think that you're a terrible parent, a terrible human being, that you're doing everything wrong, that you're going to completely mess up your child and go, okay, that's fine. You're right. I'm a terrible, terrible, terrible person. Thank you for listening. We'd be so grateful if you'd follow or subscribe and rate and review our new podcast on your favorite podcast app.
Make sure to share it with friends, family, or anyone that you think may benefit from this content.
And as a final reminder, you are not the crazy one.